It's great to be here today. Reminded me of lots of trips down the road to visit folks in this area. As you will see in a moment, a certain affinity for this area of the country that I want to get to. I too want to congratulate everyone for the 25 years of progress. The fact that you went from 38% high school graduates to 68% is remarkable in those 25 years. That is just a bit below the national average in terms of high school graduates right now. It's about 72 to 73% on average across America. You are now outperforming lots of other areas of the country. You need to be congratulated for that and the work that is behind you. But I'm not going to dwell on that too much today, because my message is generally that although progress is made, the world is moving rapidly, and it's going to require us to continue and even accelerate the work that we have accomplished over the last few years. That shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone who's worked with me. I believe that the very future of this country rests in this next generation and the one that follows. I believe that there's nothing more important in domestic or foreign policy than our children and the education that they will get. Our society's future rests on how well we commit to these children. So I want to start with something that is very personal to me, but I hope as I go through this, somewhere along this line of 4 generations, you will have been born, you will have had some experiences, and I hope you can reflect back on them. Because I think just in this shift, you can see the tremendous difference that has caused us to begin to think about whether we can get to the future that we envision for all of our children doing what we've always done. And so that's going to be our message. All of us are byproducts of the experiences we've had. All of us then will be thinking about the world from those experiences. And I would challenge you as I go through this to sort of challenge some of the assumptions that we have around what we're doing for our children and sort of begin to think about ways we might accelerate that work. So I want to talk about, let's go to the next one, Jim. That name up there, E.J. Wilhoit, is my father. My father was born in a place called La Follette, Tennessee. If you go down 25, you're from La Follette. Oh, not it. Yeah. All right. 2 of us here. Forgive us for the orange. But my father was born in La Follette. He went to school and he was one of 5 children. And when he was 15 years old, he left home. He went to join the CCC, Civil Conservation Corps, because at that time families were so devastated that they were looking for any way in the world for those young men to contribute to the economic welfare of the family. He sent all of his money back home to his mother and the rest of the family. My father, after he went through high school, and by the way, he was one of the few that did at that time, went to Detroit, Michigan. And the reason he went to Detroit, Michigan as a young man before he was married was there were jobs in Detroit. So he abandoned his heritage, his culture, which he dearly loved. And throughout his life, we always connected back to the mountains, and he got us back there as much as he could. But that abandonment of the culture was for very, very basic reasons, because he inherited a farm that no longer could support a family after the war, which he served in. I have a picture of my father and his 3 brothers, all 4 of them, in the military at the same time in World War II. So after that and a family, we went to Ohio. That's where I grew up, knowing the culture in a different way than he had experienced it. But for my father at that time, He knew, and he always resented to the day he died, that he didn't have the college education. And I bet you some of you had fathers of that same generation. But he didn't resent that. What it put in him was this tremendous desire that his children would go on to college and be better than he. Because he looked around him, around his work, and he saw these, quote, engineers that he could compete with intellectually, but he didn't have the degree. So it was really important to him. But in his generation, it was okay for him to graduate from high school, or even not even graduate from high school, and get a good job. Because General Motors was in Dayton, Ohio, and he was employed by General Motors. He had a job for his whole career. He made some advancements in that. He got a retirement and had a wonderful life. He was able to support the next generation. But the expectation, and he inherited the first real public education system that we've had. He inherited the system that exists today. It was okay in that system for some people to go on to college, not as many as we needed to work in the workforce. So we didn't need everyone to go on to college, nor did we need, some folks could go ahead and get a good job without a high school diploma. That's my father's generation. Fast forward to me, what became apparent at this point was the baby boomers took over the society. Post-war, the explosion in births. We had prosperity beyond anything anyone knew, and my father was a part of that because, and again, he didn't need a lot of education. We then at that time, as I said, ingrained in his head the idea that the future was with his children. But my dad was not a part of the general opinion and perspective of all of society. Because remember, as my father went through this, lots of people stayed in the perception that not everybody needs to graduate. There are good jobs that people can have without getting an education. Does that sound familiar to anybody here? Because this area of the country was steeped in that belief. You could get a job in the mines, and you could make a good living, and you didn't need education. So people continued that. But what was happening while people believed that, and while people still had these good jobs, yes, they were being rewarded without an education, the world was beginning to shift. And a number of us, only by fate was I born to this person who believed that there was more to be had than doing what the other generations had done. And many of you had the same experiences in your life. Somebody in your family decided and was astute enough to know that there was more out there. And what happened? This group, out of the 60s, this group began, who went on to college, began to get rewarded. Rewarded, not as great as they're being rewarded today, but there was the beginning of the separation. The only part of the problem is that not many people could see it. And I call it the front porch syndrome, because my grandmother, Dicey Jane, used to sit me on the front porch, and life was predictable as it could be. And we'd sit in that swing, and she could tell me at 10 after 10 that the mailman was coming by. So get down to the mailbox, Gene, and get the mail, and I'll read it to you. She could tell me at 12 o'clock who was going to come down the road and what kind of conversations they were going to have. In fact, I could almost repeat those conversations they had. And I kept wondering, why do you two people talk about the same thing every day? Because I know what you're going to say to each other. Her life was predictable. But while she was sitting on that road talking to those people, the world was beginning to change. It never affected her life at all. She was content there and lived her life. But the grandchild that she was in that swing with, his life was going to be very different. But not as different as the next generation. Now, my daughter is a more manifest example of all of these changes than I ever was. I sort of sat in between that prior world and this world that we're moving to now. But just to give you a sense, of the changes that went on in her lifetime that are changing more dramatically right now. This is the time in which the Cold War broke apart, the bifurcation of society, and the picking of sides broke apart, and now we began to develop multinational ideas and concerns. How foreign is this idea of a Cold War to her generation? She can't identify with it. This was the age where technology began to boom and move much more dramatically than it ever had in our history, exponentially. Give you a clue. She walked into my house the other day and said, "Dad, I can't talk to you. I've got to do something, and then we can talk." She ran into my office, opened the computer, and on the other line was the webmaster who was in New York. She's in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. The webmaster is in New York. The two of the critical clients are in Las Vegas. The support system salespeople were in Atlanta, Georgia, and the team that was supporting them was in Madison, Wisconsin. They went through a conversation that she conducted about a problem that had emerged 5 minutes before, and by the time she got off the phone, that was solved. Everybody knew their role, and everybody was moving ahead. You think that is abnormal? That is the normal operational style that this generation is going to go through. They are totally comfortable with technology. They are accustomed to solving problems from large distances. They are comfortable dealing with ambiguity and working with each other. And they want to behave that way. So this is the generation that has just gone through, and guess what? They're going to have kids right now. I hope she has a kid. First of all, I hope she has a husband that we can find for her. But assuming we can do this all together, and my wife and I are really working on this one because I'm envious of grandparents. So we're going to go to this next generation here. And I hope you understand how quickly this is going to happen to us. We don't have a lot of time to prepare and make the kinds of adjustments that are going on. But we know right now that these three forces that are up here in front of us are coming together in an integrated way that they're going to impact our lives like we can't even imagine. We are now seeing that both the migration of people around the world and the changing demographics of the population within each of these world societies is coming together with this movement of globalization and interconnectivity that's occurring because of the new technologies that are emerging. So they don't think of themselves as isolated in any one community. In fact, the more educated these youngsters are, the more connections they have with the world. Anybody in here have a young person who is a college student or just out of college right now? And I bet you if you sit around them for 5 minutes, you'll see how they're thinking about their connectivity and their network. These kids have been all over the world. I didn't even get to go to Europe until after I graduated. That's a common expectation now, isn't it? In fact, I saw where Center was advertising, this is a critical element in their education program. If you go to Center, you're going to get an international experience. They're selling this. And if you get at a table with them for a while, they'll begin to name the connections that they have all over this world. And they're changing dramatically. This next generation is going to be fluent in communication. And they are so comfortable with it. It is not foreign to them like it is for me. I will learn technology if it kills me. And it probably will. But this is not the mindset of this next group of youngsters coming into the world. And these young people are being thought about. Now, one of the new majors in college is entrepreneurship. Nobody was talking about that when I was in school. And why? Because my father worked at General Motors his whole career, left there with a wonderful retirement. That world's gone. These kids are going to have multiple careers. They're going to move around, and they're not going to have this huge infrastructure behind them like we had, or my father had. It was disappearing during my life. It's gone now. But they're looking at that as an opportunity. They're saying, hey, I like the idea of being my own boss. I like the idea of moving my career forward. I like the idea of inventing new ideas and thoughts. And they're going to be the generation where we see science go to unbelievable realms. It's already amazing what we're beginning to see, but we can't envision what's going to occur. Last week I was up at MIT, and they were showing me what is not now in somebody's head, but is actual in design phase of a number of technologies that are unbelievable. We will not need a computer in the future. I can put it right on this desktop and I can move my fingers. I will be able to pull out of the walls, glass walls, which they have up there, information and move it over and put it with other information and begin to put patterns together. I will be able to carry with me a whole world of information in my pocket that I have. And we're already seeing in our schools, we're worried about whether we have enough computers plugged into the wall. And this is going to be the future. This thing that they will carry around with them that will be an extension of them. It won't be a tool. It will be the extension of the human being that's carrying it. There will be health issues on there. There will be global connections. There will be information that's unbelievable. So, as I talked about my father, and we started talking about the education system that he inherited, I don't see a whole lot of difference in that education system than what we have right now. We are still pretty much doing what we were doing when he went to school, when I went to school, and when my daughter went to school. And that is not going to get us to this world that these students are going to face. So, as you celebrate 25 years, it's important to step back and say, the future challenges ahead of us are unbelievable. And we have to master, we have to put in front of these youngsters the kinds of experiences. Now you have to hold on to the things that Chairman Rogers talked about. That is this sense of community, of coming together to support our young people. It's absolutely essential. But I believe if we don't begin to think about how that system should have evolved as we came forward and what we need to correct this in the near future, we're going to have major problems in supporting the young people to the needs. And on this issue of globalization, one of the advantages I've had in the last few years is to travel around the world. And as I do so, what I hear from young people is, one, they like America. They don't hate us. There may be political alienation and differences between governments, but I can tell you this, anytime they see an American, they gravitate to that American. And they like what they see and they want to be like us. And now they're going to the next level. They want to be as good as or better than us. And I see it in China, I see it in India, I see it in Singapore, I see it in Finland, I see it in all over the world. These young people are thirsty to have the knowledge and to have the advantages that capitalism has brought to this country. They're going to struggle and they're going to have problems, but I can tell you this, there is an energy in these countries that we don't see in America today. They're committing themselves to their youngsters. They're doing everything they can to sacrifice for those young people, and they're beginning to build systems that we are not deeply immersed in. And we're seeing it from the top level of central government in these countries, and we're seeing it at the local level. Yeah, I'd rather be in America than any place in the world, but it does bother me what I see going on in the rest of the world. And so what we have in the United States, because of these three forces coming together, you can see it in immigration patterns into this country. Our youngsters look different than the people my age. You can see that we have to invest in those young people. I can see other countries that have a much larger base of young people than we have in the future. I can see across this world a competition that we've not experienced to this point in the history of this universe. So, if we're facing this in the future, then it seems to me we've got to get over this lack of support for our young people. We've got to build a strong commitment, and only communities can do that. But we also have to begin to think about redesigning the structures that we live. This is so dramatic. This is the United States. And you may not be able to read this. I hope you can. But what we have in 1960, a little bit before I graduated, but you can follow those trends to 70. And you can see that there was room in this society for almost everyone. If you dropped out of school, we had demand for jobs, primarily manufacturing. If you went on to college, there were some opportunities. But look what has happened between 1970 and now. The demand for what we call non-routine and non-routine analytic and non-routine interactive. Look how they have soared. And look what's happened to routine manual and non-routine manual and routine cognitive. You can see that we have at this point a real bifurcation in society of opportunity. There will be opportunities in routine jobs. And there will be opportunity for some people in society to fill those. I'm not going to say that that trend line will go down, but what I am saying is there will be fewer of them, and they will be much more competitive, therefore, and therefore will pay less. And just look at the trend lines over the last few years in terms of income that is occurring. This has been in the news recently in a very dramatic way. We've looked at it from the gross differences, and we have focused our attention on the wealthiest folks in society, but it goes beyond the wealthiest. What you can see is there is now a direct connection between education and your ability to be a person who can have a middle-class income or better and a chance for advancement in society. If you don't have it, you're going to be in high competitive jobs with low-paying wages. That is real. Because what's happened to those? Back to my triangle again, globalization. The jobs that were held by those folks can be done more cheaply and with the same level of in this sense, the difference was not that you could produce things cheaply, but when you combine cheapness with the quality of product, then we began to lose. Remember when the Japanese could produce things cheaply? We laughed at their products. When they produced cheaply with quality, it wasn't so funny anymore, i.e. Toyota. Or we can go on and on and on. The whole industry of technology. When that happened, our jobs left. That's one way it left. Secondly, anything that can be routinized, anything that can be repeated and predicted can now be done by technology. So, that combination has caused us some major problems. We are no longer going to be a place where we can afford to give an income to those folks who don't have education. That's what we face. So, what's the challenge in this area, in the state of Kentucky and across this country? It is every graduate has to move on to some form of higher education. We can no longer lie to the kids that when you graduate, you're okay. That's not even talking about the ones that don't make it to graduation. If they do not go on, they're going to be catching up for the rest of their lives. Yeah, we'll have those individual stories of those entrepreneurs who broke the system and went out there and did great things. They're going to be around for a while, but they're going to be the exception to this process. So we have to really begin to think about how we have to begin to say to young people in this community, in the 5th Congressional District, that no longer are these things on the left important. This is what we said to them historically. Basically, what we're going to say to them is, every one of you needs to be college and career ready. Every one of you needs to have a plan for moving your life forward after you graduate. Now, by college and career, again, I'm talking about all those opportunities exist for further education. It doesn't mean the traditional 4-year liberal arts degree. I don't know if anybody else has a 4-year liberal arts graduate in the room, but those are not the most employable folks at this time. It could be a 2-year technical degree. It could be some form of further advancement. And those things need to be appreciated by parents and by the kids more than they are right now. So everybody is on a path, has to be on a path to college and career ready. All of them have to agree that they're going to look for opportunities in life that take advantage of the education skills that they have right now. I don't know if you've looked at the trends of future employability in sectors, but science and technology are where the jobs are going to be in the future. And this thing about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, has been sort of something we've talked about over the last few years, but how do you begin to translate that in a way that kids can latch onto that, see the dream, begin to prepare themselves for those kinds of STEM careers? That's where the movement is occurring. Because in America, a graduate of our high school has to be ready to move on to take on some job, some employment skill that really is dependent on higher order thinking. And so when we get to this issue of what kind of contribution will Americans make to the world, because again, we're no longer in the luxury lap of isolationism, because we are now intertwined with the rest of the world. I don't care where you live, there can be a trace back to something around the world. If we're going to be the contributors to the world, we're going to have to continue to be the innovators. We're going to have to continue to be the folks who are creating the next future. If we don't, we cannot compete with numbers. 700 million people sounds like a lot, but when you put it up against 1.7 billion or 1.3 billion, then it seems pretty small. And so we can't afford a different kind of strategy than the other countries afford now. So the question is, how many kids in this community are not graduating? We know, don't we? We know that 32% of them right now are not. What are we going to do in the next few years to turn that number around so that we can say virtually all those kids are graduating? What kinds of wraparound supports are you going to give your community to make sure that happens? What are you going to do to deliver an education to those kids in the current system? And of those who do graduate, where are they going? What are the opportunities? How do we launch them into the next level of educational opportunity? So how well are we doing? These are the OECD reports on data. Gosh, this is hard to read from back there, I know. But the figure on the bar on the right is the United States. But look at this number: Shanghai, Finland, Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, we can go down the list, Korea, are all outperforming us. And you say, well, that's okay because we pay attention to all of our kids and they don't. That used to be true. But now we do not equal the world in terms of graduation percentages. They're graduating more and they're reaching higher levels. And these kinds of tests that are given on the OECD are assessments about children's ability. They take 16-year-olds across the country and they give them a bunch of problems to solve. They're not about basic facts. They're about, given this problem, use your background knowledge to figure out the answer to this problem. And that's different than the recall that we're asking so many students to make today. So we're not doing very well on this. And we cannot rest in this illiterate idea that we are an egalitarian country and we graduate more kids. It just isn't true anymore. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us. So here's what I think we ought to begin to think about. It's going to have to be more rigorous than we've had in the past. It's going to have to be much more relevant to the lives. How many kids are saying, I don't understand this connection between what I'm learning here today and what I'm interested in and what I'm doing? And a lot of us would ask that same question if we were in that class. And it's going to have to be also one that builds a much stronger support system around those kids. I am convinced that we're not going to reach the goal of all these students graduating and being prepared for higher level, next level learning, and to be contributing citizens unless we begin to challenge what we're doing day to day. And I think this is going to be a tough one for us in education. And it's going to be a tough one for parents because every one of us went through public school and we know what school should look like. Every one of us has certain ideas about what's important and what's not. But what I'm saying is I think this is where I am today. I'm not ready to fix schools anymore. I think we fixed schools as we have defined them, as my father inherited when he started school, we've done about all the fixing of that we can do. And I think it's time to step back and begin to think about what can we do. If the goal here is not to fix schools, but to ensure high levels of learning for every child, then you start figuring out ways to do things that are different than we're doing them right now. And yes, this is different and challenging, but the goal here is high levels of learning for every child. And if that's the challenge, let's fix that. And it seems to me if we're going to fix that, then we have to believe that we're going to set world-class standards for these youngsters. Every one of them. Not just a few of them, every one of them. Now, some of our kids have world-class standards, expectations of them, but not all of them. But we're going to have to get all of them. And by world-class standards, that's why we have been so anxious and supportive of and driving this idea of Common Core standards. And when we went to develop those Common Core standards, commonality is not, that is an advancement for 46 entities to come together and say we're going to agree on this. So I don't want to downplay the fact that states can get together and did get together. But the biggest shift here on the Common Core is that those expectations are college and career ready. And we didn't go to parents or K-12 folks first to talk about this. We went to higher education and asked them a simple question. What would it take for a student to enter a college credit-bearing course and get a C or better and are prepared to take the next level in the education system? And they told us. And then we went to the folks in business and asked them the question of what would it take for a person to enter into a middle level income. We were biased on this. We took the SCANS report, the Department of Labor statistics, and took those that would give you a middle class income and opportunity for advancement. What would it take for them to get into that track? But who would want less of that for your kid? How many of us send our kids off to college thinking, oh, I think they should take 3 remediation classes before they start getting credit that I have to pay for as a parent? None of us. And how many of us would want to say for my child, I want to give them a minimum wage job that they're going to be stuck in for life? None of us want these things for our kids. But if we want these things for our children, and for us older selfish folks, for our society, then we've got to listen to colleges and higher ed folks, and we've got to listen to people who are bringing people into the industry. And what they told us was that there's a set of standards here that we've not had in the past. And I know when you look at those standards, they are higher than what we have right now. Let's not play games on this one. These standards require more of our youngsters than we've had in the past. And many of our youngsters aren't achieving at those standards now. So what are we going to do in 2014-15? We're going to ratchet up a set of expectations for students who are not achieving under the current lowered expectations. And every state's in a different place on this, all the way from Tennessee with the lowest in the country to Massachusetts with the highest. We made a commitment that no state would lower its standards. So we literally moved the nation to the top of the international comparisons. And we didn't do it because we added a whole bunch of new content. Because we created schools at a time when there was a lack of information in the society, and we had to take it out of the minds of the few, usually an 8th grade education person, and put it in the minds of kids because there was no information flowing. And the information was in this thing called a book, and the technology was a thing called a chalkboard with some chalk. And we've upgraded that a lot, haven't we? Chalkboards are now whiteboards, right? That's about where we are in technology. And in terms of literate people interacting with kids, the fact that we created this safe place to bring people to get knowledge is now the confining place for them to get knowledge. Because in this society, lack of information is no longer the problem. We have more than we can handle. The problem is we can't digest it all and make sense out of it all. But certainly, holding a child's knowledge base to that of a single classroom with a single teacher or in a school doesn't make sense in this kind of society. We got to first raise the standards and say this is important. And again, the difference is not so much the content, but the cognitive challenges that we're putting in front of these youngsters. And the cognitive challenges are problem solving, critical thinking, analysis, synthesis, all those things that require one to take prior knowledge and translate it into a new form of understanding and solution. That's what our kids have got to do. And that's what those new standards represent. If you read them, there literally is fewer number of content standards in those learning progressions. But if you get, the challenge for the teacher is, if you're going to teach 3 concepts in mathematics at the 5th grade level, you better teach them deeply. Spend time on them so that they become mathematicians and mathematical thinkers, as opposed to running through a curriculum without that deep knowledge. Huge changes in terms of the expectations of those standards. I think we won't get there, though, in translating those standards if we hold on to some of the other system pieces that we have. I think we got to go to performance-based learning. Does it make sense any longer that you enter school when you're 5 and that you spend 8 months in a school and that you graduate when you're 17? All of us? In fact, we have a pride over the fact that our kids stay together throughout their career. We ought to be applauding the fact that all of them reach the standards we want, regardless of how long it takes, either at an accelerated rate or a bit longer. It's better for a child to spend another year or 2 in school and master the curriculum than it is to pass them on without the knowledge. And it is a shame that we're holding on to some of our gifted and talented youngsters because they're bored out of their gourd. They know what you're already teaching and they're ready to move on. And you won't get that as long as we hold on to the system that we're talking about. Now, you talk about a change here. That means in a classroom you would have kids at various levels? Yes. Does it mean that some students would be moving through the system at an accelerated pace? Absolutely. Does it mean that a student may have to work on a concept a bit longer? Absolutely. But the only way you're going to get to that is, what's the standard? What are the learning progressions? What are the assessments that measure that knowledge? And then what are the applications and the skills and knowledge that the kids have to produce to get through those levels? It's going to require teaming to a much greater degree than we ever have in our schools. You can't be isolated and do this kind of work. And it's going to require very different kinds of responsibilities. For me, I think the other piece that we've got to work on is these kids are going to have to take responsibility for being active learners. The responsibility here is that the student owns this. They don't need to be entertained by an adult throughout their education career. Yes, I see it as kind of a support system branching out, but at those early years, we need lots of things around these youngsters. We need early childhood education. We need it directed by those youngsters. They need to progress through that system, but as they go forward, I see multiple pathways. And that's where this relevance begins to come in. Some kids could be getting this knowledge in one way and other kids in another. You can get the same knowledge in a career and technical program that you can get in a college-bound program. The point is, you all meet the mathematics standards, you all meet the English language arts standards, you all meet the science standards, but you do it in a different way. Talk about blowing up the classroom then. We're talking about students who are out in communities at that high school level. We are talking about students who are making decisions at that high school level about what is most relevant to them and interacting with adults around it. It means bringing a community into that learning process in a much more dynamic way than we have at this point. I think this anytime, anywhere learning, I've referenced a moment ago about the confinement of the classroom today, but we've generally in education, where we've transformed other kinds of sectors in society dramatically, we are still adding technology on to the traditional system rather than using technology as a primary delivery system. So it's going to mean much greater thought about what we can do with technology to assist students in the learning. And that can happen through tools to teachers to help them deliver individualized, customized learning to students. It means we could be much more precise about diagnostic tools that need to be in place for students who are struggling or those that are accelerating. It means we could engage students in a self-directed learning journey through the education process that could engage parents and students in that process of making decisions. It means lots of things that we're not now making mainstream in the education system. And then finally, I think it's going to, by definition, to do all those things above, you can't have teachers and administrators doing what they've always done. We have taught administrators historically, we're changing this now, that your primary job is to keep that school building in order and to manage it. Instructional leadership is the new role for a leader. The building of a community of learners. The role of the teacher is going to have to shift. The primary role of the teacher in the future is going to be that individual who can be the maestro for the students under the charge of that teacher. And that means no longer do you have to worry about teaching a lesson or talking directly to those students on a regular basis. It means you organize learning around the needs of youngsters. That means schools of preparation are going to have to begin to emphasize data analysis, the kinds of roles that they have around individualization, customization of learning process, and it means our whole professional development system is going to have to be challenged. So other than that, everything's fine. I know these are big things. And I know that it's a lot to ask of educators. But I can't think of anything more exciting to begin to think about right now, because what it means is we're going to entrust back to teachers this responsibility for helping students move through this education journey and developing this sense of student agency. It means beginning to challenge and opening up the kind of processes and structures that we've had in place in our system. It means for teachers, for the first time, we're going to come to you and say, you are the professionals. Yes, we have said to you, these are the outcomes we want in our system. It is appropriate for society to say to teachers, this is what we want our students to know and be able to do. It is appropriate for higher education and for the business to weigh in on this thing and for them to be prepared. But the worst thing we could do in this next few years is to standardize practice. What we need now is innovation, openness, rethinking, challenging some of the assumptions that we have, and I can't think of anything more exciting to a teacher. But from my mind, in terms of students, this could be extremely exciting. Think about what we could do with youngsters if we began to charge them. I was in a classroom recently with a second grade student. And this school system has begun to think about how can we begin in little steps to get to that point where I talked about a student taking responsibility for learning. Well, first of all, they have to know what they're trying to learn. So you go into a classroom and ask these youngsters, what are you learning today? They should be able to articulate very directly what that goal of learning is in that classroom, and they should be able to talk about where they are in the learning process against that. So I said, what are you doing today? And two little second grade girls were sitting there, and the one little girl said, we're learning to tell time. And I said, well, how do you know how to tell time? And she said, well, there are 4 steps in telling time. And she started to go through those steps. And she said, I'm at step 3. But my friend Sally here is at step 4. And she said, but that's okay. Because the second grader now, that's okay because you shouldn't move on in learning until you get the second step before you go to the third step. And when I was having trouble with the second step, I turned to Sally, and Sally showed me what she did in the second step. And when I got the second step down, the third step was really easy. What's that kid doing, and what did those teachers do? And that little kid had an I can learn statement there in front of her, and she was able to map that out, and she was learning her goals as she was moving forward. She was beginning to internalize the fact at second grade that it was her responsibility to manage that learning process and to be able to evaluate that. Kids won't do that unless you begin to turn that over. When you move to the middle school level, then there's much more sophistication about all of this, and when you get to the high school level, these students will amaze you with what they're able to do, and they're so prepared to move forward. But it's a very, very, very different role than what we've had in the past. So students, I think, are going to be our greatest allies in this. I have not met any of them that have gone into these early stages, and we do have 7 states, and Kentucky's one of them. Kentucky's one of the 7 states. Kentucky, to your credit, is one of almost every consortium we have. And that's probably overwhelming to a lot of you, but I think that's a great statement for this state to say that you're ready to move forward on these things. But we have these 7 states taking on these principles that I just talked about in certain schools and certain districts in the state. We're beginning to build a cadre, and in those places, those students would not go back to the way it was. They are excited. And in terms of business and parents and community, obviously, none of this can happen in isolation. Parents need to be saying to their kids, school is important. I may not have been successful, but you need to be successful. Bringing information to those kids on a regular basis, talking to them continuously about who they are, what they like to do, how it excites them, and how we can build on that. And I don't say to parents, it's your job to teach the children all the things they need to know. That's scary to a lot of parents. Particularly mathematics at middle and high school level these days is a tough assignment for a lot of parents. The best thing they can do is show those children that education's important and that they set priorities for those children. Turn the TV off after 2 hours. Decide that game can't be played another level until you master the next kingdom or whatever, instead of paying attention to what you need to be doing. That education is your job and your contribution to this family. And for a community, I think this relevance cannot happen without other people being educators. Teachers will be one educator in this next system, but there'll be all kinds of others wrapped around them. And some of the best teachers are people who don't have teaching degrees. Business people who've had experience in these areas can be the best teachers, and more than the teacher, they can be the strong motivator for these kids. They can bring a sense of reality to the school that we don't have in many cases, and they can be the strong supporters of the education system. Everybody has a role to play in where we're going. I don't know how it will flesh out. I'm not sure that I can even paint a picture of what this future would be like, but I do know it has to be different than what it is right now. I am convinced that the two goals that we have set for our children are the right goals for us and for them. They have to graduate and they have to be on to success in life. And it's not simply an economic issue, it's a matter of citizenship, it's a matter of a self-fulfilling life and a sense that I am someone contributing to this society. And that only makes this community stronger as you move ahead. I love being back here. I love what you're doing. I applaud the 25 years of work. I hope I haven't put so many things on the table that you say, oh no, go away. I hope it creates a sense of the urgency that's before us, but more than that, that some of these things can be accomplished. You may not be able to reach this ultimate vision about all these changes overnight. Find something you can begin with and master that and move on. Tomorrow brings only a single opportunity for a brighter future down the road. I applaud you, and anything I can do from where I sit to support this work, I would love to work with any of you, and I am excited about the work that Kentucky is going to take on. Thank you.